What's up, everybody? Welcome to Swan Signal Live. I got a really special edition of the show today. I am shooting from PubKey in New York City. This is a Bitcoin bar run by two great Bitcoiners, and I can't tell you how excited I am to be here. I mean, look at this backdrop. I mean, this place is amazing. We're going to be at a meetup later tonight. This is the place to go to if you are a Bitcoiner in New York City. So check out PubKey. So I got two really special guests for you today, too. We got two OG Bitcoin educators, Jimmy Song and Anita Posch. And I can't wait to get into this conversation. But before I do, I want to bring up Pacific Bitcoin to you guys. That's the conference that Swan throws October 5th and 6th this year in Santa Monica. Last year, it was one of the best events that I went to. I know I'm a little bit biased, but it's just a great way to meet in person with other Bitcoiners. We got great speakers. It's more of a festival-like feel to it. And I can't recommend it enough. So go to pacificbitcoin.com. You can use the promo code right here, Signal, to get 21% off your tickets today. So check it out, Pacific Bitcoin, October 5th and 6th. So without further ado, let's bring in our guests. I can't wait to speak with them. Jimmy Song and Anita Posch, welcome to Swan Signal Live.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, the reason why I want to talk to you guys so much is because I think you guys do such important work, boots on the ground education around the world, really going to the jurisdictions that need Bitcoin the most. And so first, I just want to start with maybe Anita Posch. Anita, I watched your documentary this week, and I can't believe that I didn't see it months ago when it first premiered. It was amazing. Digging into the human rights aspects of Bitcoin. So let's start there. Like, tell me a little bit about that documentary, how you kind of framed it, and why you made that documentary.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I think it's one of the most important pieces of work that I have done so far, because it's basically a look into the Human Rights Convention. And I took the passages of the human rights that I listed there in the Convention of the United Nations and compared it with the properties of Bitcoin and which of these human rights basically can be enforced through the use of Bitcoin. And that was the basis for this documentary. And one of the highlights this year, for instance, was that I then in April worked with 50 human rights activists from all over Africa. We worked in Zambia, and it was a workshop about all kinds of tools that activists need for their work as human rights activists. But one part was especially about freedom money. And that was a workshop I did with the people and introduced them to Bitcoin, because for me, that's the most unique use case that no other cryptocurrency and no other money can basically no other cryptocurrency can enforce human rights like the right to property or the right to free association, to freedom of association, freedom of speech, and others.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love how you went through those declarations, freedom of speech, freedom of privacy, freedom from discrimination. And you kind of broke down how Bitcoin allows people as a tool of freedom to achieve those goals. And Jimmy, I know you've talked about this a lot. You focus on sometimes like the morality of Bitcoin and what it could bring to the world. And you were a programmer, but it seems like over time you've shifted to more like, hey, this is how Bitcoin's really going to impact society. So what's your reaction to like what Anita just said and how you feel about Bitcoin as a way to kind of promote human rights?
Well, so I talk about a lot of the issues that you're bringing up, in particular, how really just how unjust the fiat system is in the new book that I have coming out, Fiat Ruins Everything. So if you're interested in my take on all of that, it's in there. But yeah, I do think that more than like talking about how Bitcoin sort of like enables a lot of human rights are things that we have already, right? It's that fiat money has taken them away. And that's sort of like the framing that I think we need to get more used to, because it's kind of like fish and water, right? Like they don't know that they're swimming in water. What the hell is water, right? Like that's the old joke. And we're kind of in that situation because we've been on a fiat standard since 1971. There are very few people alive that were under sort of like a classical gold standard or whatever. And you know, human rights, I think, are very much a part of what we have naturally. It's just that governments are have sort of taken them away through the use of fiat money. So, for example, they can just take away our property through inflation in a very stealthy way, and that's one of the major ways in which they get people to do things as well. They pay out money that's printed from nothing, and it looks like a market process, but it actually isn't, right? Like it's money printed out of nothing. So in a sense, they're enslaving you with the money, with you being glad that they're enslaving you. Like it's a very sort of like subtle and tricky maneuver that gets used to devalue the rights that we already have. And the way I see it, it's not so much that Bitcoin gives you these rights; it's that you have these rights already. It takes away fiat money's power to sort of abuse these rights that we already have.
Yeah, Bitcoin removes the shackles of fiat currencies and gives those rights back to people. And, you know, Anita, you spent so much time recently in Africa, I know, and, you know, countries like Zimbabwe, where they have suffered from not just inflation, but hyperinflation. And so I was wondering if you could just touch on your experience of going there and teaching people about Bitcoin there, and what's been the reaction, what's maybe been some of the hurdles that you've come across in terms of driving Bitcoin adoption.
Yeah, sure. So at the moment, I think there is 600% inflation in Zimbabwe. So that means that the exchange rate to the US dollar is basically shooting up. And sometimes in days you have a doubling of, or losing 50% of the value of the national currency. And it's basically a tool to, steal from the money. It's basically a dictatorship of kleptocrats, and the system is very well established. So you print national currency to steal the US dollars basically from the people. I mean, just on a side note, a story how this works. So the central bank is printing the national currency, and they basically engage so-called runners who drive into the landscape, like into the countryside, and go to the small villages and sell the national currency to the people who live there for US dollars, because the people who live there need the national currency to pay for the school fees, for instance. So that's really the way how this works. And yes, there are a lot of people who know about the fact that Bitcoin is a hard asset, that it's not inflatable by any government or anyone. And so they started using Bitcoin as a means to fight inflation. It's difficult, as everywhere in the countries I visited. I mean, you have people who are already have heard about Bitcoin, who want to do something, who are using it. But it's also a fact that 80% are rather using USDT because it's more stable, they believe. Because, I mean, in the short run, people need the money immediately. They can't save for 3 or 5 years. It's nothing that they really can do. And in that case, I do understand when they rather want to use the US dollar, USDT. But I always tell them, USDT can be censored. It can be gone tomorrow because it's a centralized company. That can't happen with Bitcoin. And over time, if you're really able to at least save a little bit of money, now with Lightning, you can basically also save $1 a month. Then if you can save that for 3 to 5 years, you will be much better off than without it. And I see the interest in Bitcoin education and in Bitcoin groups also in Zimbabwe growing. And that's a great development. And I think it will only get faster in the coming years.
That's good to hear. And Jimmy, you've done a lot of work, kind of like grassroots, you know, speaking to countries in countries like emerging markets with high inflation rates. almost talking about Bitcoin, teaching even programming, like in El Salvador with that recent, I think it's Cubo Plus is how you pronounce it. They recently had their like new graduate class. Why do you think it's important to kind of be on the ground and spreading knowledge around Bitcoin in those jurisdictions? Why do you do it?
Well, I do it because I want the Bitcoin ecosystem to get better. But I want to touch on sort of like the dynamics of inflation, because two places that I visited over the last year were in essentially hyperinflation that I want to talk about. One was Argentina, and I was there last November. And I was also in Beirut, Lebanon in January of this year. And the thing that's very striking about both of those places is that when you get hyperinflation, and I'm sure this is very different than, say, like Zimbabwe or something like that, those places had credit cards at some point. But that just immediately stops, right? Like, because if you're using a credit card in Argentina, you're getting ripped off. The rate that you get on your credit card is almost half of what you would get on the blue market, and it's kind of crazy, like how much the government takes away through those means. So what you want to do is use cash, except when you're using cash, you realize very quickly that the largest denominated bill is not that much. I when I was in Argentina. The first day I arrived, I exchanged, dollars at the blue market rate, and it was $1 to, I believe it was 284 pesos. And I stayed there 3 weeks. By the time I left, I changed some back, and I got a rate of 314. So there was like 10% inflation in just 3 weeks. But their largest bill is the 1,000 peso note, so it's worth like $3. Which makes like paying for anything just such a pain, right? Like it's crazy because you have to like have these giant stacks of bills, and there were people that were changing out Bitcoin for pesos and so on, and you text them on WhatsApp or whatever, and they come straight to your house, right? And they always bring a backpack because the amount of money, if you want like $300. It's like so much that they have to carry all of that in their backpack. Similar thing in Lebanon. The day I arrived, it was 44,000 Lebanese pounds to a dollar. And I was there 1 week. And the day I left, it was 49,000 Lebanese pounds to a dollar. And their largest bill is 100,000 Lebanese pounds, which is $2, right? And nobody takes credit card because waiting 45 days to get paid is too much. You're going to lose like 20, 30%. So everything is done with cash, with these very inconvenient stacks of bills. Every store has these large money counting machines. This is what Fiat has done, is it adds all of this friction and makes everything just kind of break once you enter into that hyperinflationary cycle. And this is where Bitcoin can really help. Unfortunately, what Anita said is correct. A lot of people trust the dollar more, and for a good reason. For them, their entire lives, most of these people have gone through multiple currencies. So in any Latin American country, for example, you've had like 3 changes of currency. So the Brazilian real, there was something else before that, and something else before that. And you usually go through something like that every 10 to 15 years. I think I've called it sort of like the inverse jubilee or something like that, where instead of all your debts getting wiped out, all your savings get wiped out. It's horrible. But that's what happens to these people. And pretty much every country I visited, they've experienced something like this. Even Georgia, which was one of the better countries in terms of their currency, they actually appreciated against the dollar. I think it was 3.5 a year before I visited, and it was like 2.6 when I visited, largely due to Russians leaving Russia and going somewhere else, and they brought all their money with them. But even there, they had experienced like the Bitcoiners I spoke with, they had experienced 2 complete devaluations of their currency within their lifetimes. But during those times, what did they use? They used the dollar, and that's what they trust, because that's something for them that's lasted a very long time. And I can kind of get that, but this is the wonderful thing about Bitcoin. Time is on our side. The longer it lasts, the more people will trust it, and the more people trust it, the longer it'll last. So we have this virtuous cycle going for us. And like right now we're still only like 15 years old, or a little bit less than 15 years old. Once we get to the 20-30 year mark, this is going to be it. And we, even with the dollar, you're seeing significant inflation, and you could see it just in the grocery store. Even if you're in the U.S., you definitely feel it if you're in a developing country, because prices have gone up a lot more there. So one of the human rights things that I pay attention to is North Korea, and one of the things that I learned about their black market, largely due to COVID and a bunch of other things, but also the inflation, is that the prices in the black market just doubled overnight almost. So really what this inflation is hurting is orphans in North Korea that can't buy something to eat, right? Like we're all of this money printing that we're doing, it's hurting those people. I mean, like if you're in the US, if you're in a first world country, you're doing okay, right? Like there's all sorts of social programs and things like that. But you're an orphan in North Korea, you're gonna starve, and those are the people that it's getting stolen from. So for me, when you're talking about the moral argument for Bitcoin, this is what it is. It's you're taking from the poorest of the poor, the people that have like zero power, right? No representation whatsoever. We at least have the right to vote and maybe influence some policy that can eventually eliminate the Fed and change their policy. North Korean orphan has zero rights, right? Zero influence. They can't do anything. And those are the people that are getting stolen from in favor of the investment bankers and on Wall Street that are using 100x leverage to do an FX trade to make 13 bips on a trade and afford a house in the Hamptons as a result. This is what is just horrifyingly offensive to me about the fiat system.
Yeah, I mean, Argentina, they just had an overnight devaluation just this week, right? 18%. If you're an individual with a family, you went to bed one night and you woke up and your savings were devalued through no fault of your own. And you're right, Anita and Jimmy, you guys are both right that a lot of people look at the dollar and it's relatively more stable, but it still has the same vulnerabilities as all fiat currencies, which is debasement at the hands of the issuer. But Anita, specifically, it seems like when these countries start to lose control of their currencies, what comes next is more capital controls. And you see that with Argentina, even they limit the amount of US dollars that individuals can hold in their bank accounts and cash. That's why there's a black market. Do you see that similarly in Africa with these countries that have high rates of inflation or authoritarian governments? Are there also more capital controls? And then how do you get people to understand, hey, this is why Bitcoin's also important, is because of certain properties that it has?
Yeah, you're completely right. I mean, in Zimbabwe, you have foreign exchange control. The whole market of exchanging to US dollars is basically controlled by the central bank. So for instance, if you have a business in Zimbabwe and you want to buy goods from South Africa and you need US dollars for that, then you have to apply at the central bank for that amount of US dollars that it's exchanged for you. And every week there's an auction where the central bank basically sets the rate for the Zimbabwe dollar to the US dollar. And then in that course of this auction, they also grant the businesses their US dollar amount that they asked for. And then it's not the case that the central bank gives the money to the business to be able to pay for the invoice for the goods from South Africa. No, the central bank pays for you. And sometimes the central bank misses the 30-day limit that is needed to get this order basically going. And then you have to start all over again. So I mean, also the value of the Zimbabwean dollar to the US dollar is basically totally controlled. That's not a free market. And this control, yes, is also on the level of individuals. So on a regular basis, basically the limits that you can send if you even use a bank account and if you use online banking, the limits of that are lowered. So I can't remember exactly, but I think the last time it was like in a week you can send transactions in US dollar of a value of 200 US dollar or 300, not more. So this system is not working. And also, I agree what Jimmy says. It's the same in Zimbabwe. Cash is king, and everyone wants US dollar cash. And the second big option to pay for goods and services is mobile money, which is basically from a service provider, and you can send it via text messages. But the problem is you can't send this mobile money out of the country, and no one can send it to you from somewhere else. Bank accounts are very expensive and very bureaucratic. And in many cases, the government via the central bank just shuts down your bank account. I know some people who unbanked themselves, despite the fact that they could use the bank. And they are living now of Bitcoin. So they hold it, and whenever they need US dollar, they exchange it peer-to-peer on the ground. And another example of how dangerous life in these settings is, I have a friend who I introduced to Bitcoin, and the friend is a freelancer and works together with people from other African countries. And she started to pay those freelancers in Bitcoin. And she said to me, when I do that via my bank account, then the central bank and the government starts asking me, why are you sending money out of the country? And and that's not a fun question to be had in these circumstances. And so that all goes to show how important it is to have a permissionless medium of exchange, a permissionless asset that you can use all over the world, borderless, and can receive and send. And it basically, that's the point. That's what we don't see in European or Western or Northern countries, let's say it like that. We don't have these kinds of problems. Most of us don't, sorry. I heard now also in Austria, since I visited here like the last 2 months, I hear more and more people telling me, oh yeah, there is this guy, he's working as a comedian, and now they shut down his bank account and he started using Bitcoin because someone didn't want him to say what he says. So these are all these kinds of examples. And I mean, sometimes people say to me, what you are telling me from Zimbabwe and the human rights activists, these are all edge cases. Yeah, it's not for the regular people. And I say, no. So on the one hand, on the first thing is these edge cases are the important cases which prove the point that it works. And these cases are for every one of us. And so, yeah, I believe Bitcoin is an important tool. But at the moment, I mean, why am I working in the global south in countries with authoritarian leaders? Because I think Bitcoin is needed the most there. And it makes sense for me to go there where my knowledge is needed the most. And that's why I do what I do.
Yeah, and thank you for your work. I mean, it's just super important, especially for people that are speaking out against authoritarian governments, to have this tool that is uncensorable, that they can continue to send value to each other and organize protests. I mean, it's incredibly important to teach them how to use this tool because it is new to them. And you guys have both been in countries that we talked about that have suffered through hyperinflation, mismanagement of their currencies. I was wondering if you could speak to the feeling there of the people, of the populace, of how you felt that inflation has infected them, their behavior, just the general mood. Jimmy, I don't know if you could speak to like any stories or people that you spoke to while you were traveling to these regions, just to kind of talk about the effects of inflation, maybe the deeper effects.
Well, so one of the saddest things in Argentina that I saw was, they just to give you some context. So I told you the day I left, I exchanged 314 Argentinian pesos to a dollar. As of a couple of days ago, it was now 690 Argentinian pesos to a dollar. So that's less than a year. It's like 9 months. It's more than doubled, and this is the blue market rate. Now, if you're living in an economy like that, it's obviously like kind of a crazy, crazy deal. I would go on a taxi or something like that, and it would cost like a couple hundred pesos sometimes, which is like less than a dollar. How the heck are these people making any money? The transportation system hasn't caught up with all of the inflation, so it costs like 10 pesos to go like 7 stops or something like that, which is like 3 cents or something ridiculously cheap. You can think about how crazy that makes everything. But the saddest thing I saw was you go to all of these tourist places, right? I'm traveling with my family, I'm hanging out, and I'm going to a tourist place, and there are these people with wads of pesos, and they hold it in their hand and just kind of go like this, right? And they say cambio, cambio, which means I change, I change. They are looking for a kind tourist to change their pesos for dollars because they can't get it at the bank, right? The capital controls that you're talking about is what prevents them from being able to change to something that is more stable. And it's something that they were doing for hours, right? Like think about spending 4 hours just at a tourist stop so you could have some savings vehicle. And it is extremely sad because if these people like just knew about Bitcoin, and there's a lot of people there that do, like the WhatsApp guy, I text her or whatever, they would be able to change it for them. Just give them Lightning payments for their cash, which they're going to change out soon anyway. That is what really saddened me, because it was like and these are people that were obviously not well off, that could afford to sit there for 4 hours, saying cambio, cambio, and trying to get people to, get change money for them. The other thing that you see in a lot of these countries is like a horrific amount of rent seeking. And these countries get to a hyperinflationary stage for a reason. So in Lebanon, for example, what you see is that the state has control of the utilities, and what starting in around 2000, or I think 2017 even, just things weren't working as much. So you get blackouts for a few hours and so on. What I noticed when I was there was it had gotten so bad that at night you'd get maybe 1 hour of streetlights, right? So the entire place is dark. It's like hard to drive or whatever. But what that's led to is every building now has its own generator, because the state isn't providing any electricity or any reliable electricity. And the reason is because there are all of these bureaucrats that get hired by the government to get their votes. So as a way to dish out political favors, they give them these jobs where they don't do anything. The backstop to all of that ends up being sort of the US dollar, at least in Lebanon, because what happens is, they keep printing money, and you get into hyperinflation. Just people don't want Lebanese pounds anymore. They want dollars way more. And there are enough dollars in circulation where that's actually feasible. And the Cantillon juice that you can squeeze out by printing more money gets to be less and less. And they've kind of run out of Cantillon juice at this point. There are all these government bureaucrats and that keep asking for raises, and they get them, but then it lasts like maybe a couple of months before they have to ask for new raises again. These people have to like go get second jobs. They weren't doing anything anyway, so they have to get like a second job. So it's like this weird like conglomeration of incentives that go awry. And this is true in every hyperinflating country. You got into the situation as a result of really bad government management, usually some sort of buying of votes through some sort of patronage or something like that. So like for a lot of the people that are seeing it, it's kind of like, okay, well, kind of good riddance. They're not reliable. We're able to kind of do things for ourselves. And that's what I've seen. And in a sense, those places tend to be a little bit more pleasant to visit as long as you don't have to deal with the government bureaucracy. Because in a sense, it's all market driven at that point, right? Like you have electricity, you have the things that you want. It's if you need to touch the government at all, that's horrible. But everything else tends to be a lot better because it tends to be more market driven. They're desperate for dollars, so they will treat you very nicely, especially as a tourist that has dollars. Come shop at our place. They make things nice. It's kind of weird, but that it's counterintuitive, but that's what ends up happening.
Yeah, shall I add to that how it's
Absolutely.
in Zimbabwe? Yeah. So it's very depressing actually. And I think you also get the feel with people. I mean, if your currency is depreciating that much and you basically daily, the first question in the morning is always, what's the rate today? So how much do I get for my US dollar that I have or my Zimbabwe dollar? Because the interesting thing, if you have hyperinflation in the Zimbabwe dollar, you also have US dollar prices increasing. Despite the fact that they should actually stay the same, because I mean, yes, we have inflation in the US dollar, but not that much that it changes one day to the next. And so I think a lot of people also take the inflation as an advantage to use their own to raise their own prices in US dollars. So there is a sense of depression around. You're helpless. You're absolutely helpless. What do you want to do if you only earn Zimbabwe dollar? And so people, they buy stuff immediately. So as soon as you get your monthly loan not loan, your money income every month, or as soon as you're able to hustle to sell something and to buy something else, you buy it immediately. You don't wait. So if you need a computer, for instance, and you see a good offer, you buy it immediately because first, the price is going up the next day. And secondly, you don't know if it's going to be there the next day, because it's also not that case that you have lots of things to choose from. You don't have this how do you say that, overflow of goods like we have it in our countries. And so also to that example that Jimmy had from people who wanted to exchange their money, what I've experienced is we were in Mashwingo, which is a town in south of Zimbabwe. I hope I say it correctly and it's not in the north. And I've been there quite some time. And we went to the local Pick and Pay, to the supermarket. And there was a long line of people outside standing and waiting. And I wasn't sure what's going on. So why did they not go inside? And then I realized they came up to us and asked us, do you want to use my card to pay inside the Pick and Pay? And the thing is, you can pay in US dollars or in Zimbabwe dollar at the Pick and Pay. So if we take their card, we are paying, they put a lot of trust in us because they basically give us their banking card and we go inside, pay for our goods, come outside and give those people the US dollars that we otherwise would have used to pay for in the Pick and Pay. That's how money exchange is working there on the streets. And another example, also in Harare, for instance, you have to pay for the municipal water infrastructure. So you have a monthly bill to pay. but people haven't gotten any municipal water for years. And if then it's so toxic that you can't use it. A friend of mine told me he once put municipal water into his fish pond and all the fish died. So that's the quality and the service that you have, but still you have to pay for it. Then there are lots of potholes. I've never seen such bad road infrastructure as in Zimbabwe. And also the example of how politicians basically buy votes. When you go to the countryside, and it's pre-election time, you always see trucks coming and people surrounding these trucks, and the people get seeds for free or oil or things like that from the parties, the leading parties, yes, that they vote for them. And the last anecdote or example, which I had to learn as well. So you can go into a shop and you have two tills maybe. You have a US dollar till and you have one for Zimbabwean dollar. And if you pay in US dollar, there are no coins. You only have the $1, $5, $10, $20 banknotes. So if you, for instance, pay something that costs $1.50, you get basically nothing back. What you get is like small goodies, like a chewing gum or a small bottle of water, or you get a voucher where they write down, okay, you're good for 50 cents. So it's really, people find ways to make it work. But to be honest, I don't know how people are able to live their lives there.
Yeah. Well, it seems like corruption of the money leads to corruption of everything else, corruption of the government. And then it's difficult to resist that corrupt government when the infrastructure is completely broken, right? Like you said, like Jimmy, you said, like the streetlights are only on for an hour. There's a bunch of potholes. There's not good electricity there, reliable electricity. And so it's really difficult to resist, I would imagine, those corrupt governments when there's no infrastructure in place because the money's been broken. And I think one of the things that I think about with everything that you just said was this idea of high time preference. When you can't think of the future, you can't dream longer into the future about like maybe a job you want, or maybe you want to have kids because you're just trying to survive. And I think that's really the hardest part to grapple with when you hear these stories about people, is that they can't dream bigger, right? They can't plan for the future because their money's broken. And that's what Bitcoin aims to solve, right? That Bitcoin is a solution to debasement. That's what Satoshi said right from the beginning. And I want to bring up another topic, which is, Worldcoin, just one of these shit coins that came out, part of my French, but it came into Africa, and Kenya is actually like, no, we don't want that in here anymore. But I think you see a lot of adoption of other cryptocurrencies in these regions from hyperinflation because they kind of get duped into believing, okay, this is similar to Bitcoin. And really, I think all of us here know that there's only one Bitcoin. But have you guys dealt with that in terms of like fighting this narrative between, Bitcoin and not cryptos, and how do you distinguish them, or how do you educate people on what are the differences between Bitcoin and these other cryptocurrencies in these regions where they're desperate for anything to try to protect their purchasing power? Maybe I'll throw it to Jimmy.
Yeah, the unfortunate thing is VCs and CZ and people like that go around all of these countries, and they make their tours and stuff like that. It's it's like front page news when he visits like a country or something, and he's visited like nearly every country in the world. I found that everywhere I've gone, there's a small group of actual Bitcoiners, and then you got like 5 or 6 different meetups for altcoin this and that or whatever. And this is honestly like blood on the hands of the shitcoiners, right? Like this is the confusion that they've sowed. And really what they're selling is this dream of rent seeking, the ability to get in early and not have to work and do nothing and make lots of money. Like this has been the Keynesian fallacy for a long time. It's just this ability to do nothing, make lots of money, and everything will be okay somehow with a magical Keynesian fairy or something. But that's of course not the case. And the few people that realize it tend to be the actual Bitcoiners, because maybe they've been burned by altcoins or seen how they've done or whatever. What I do find is that the longer Bitcoin has been around in a particular country, the more the less of the altcoining there is, and the more Bitcoining there is. And that kind of makes sense, right? Like there are more people that have been burned and so on. And the predictions that honestly Bitcoin maximalists make tend to come true. Whereas, the guy saying Ripple's going to $20, like none of that comes true. And like, just you look at the history, you see who's been right over a period of time. Again, time is on the Bitcoiner side. And it becomes obvious that that Bitcoiners are right. And that's what's encouraging to me, is that rationality does win out. It might take a long time because there's a lot of people that try to confuse the issue, especially people like CZ and like Do Kwon and all those people that have like fallen completely on their face. But it just takes time, because a lot of people are confused. They haven't studied Bitcoin at all. And I've said this before in other venues, but this idea that people buy altcoins after like studying lots of things a lot, that's not how it is. People buy altcoins because their friend told them, hey, like it went up 30% last week and I had it, you should go get in too. That's how they do it. They're not investigating things at all. As soon as they do investigate, the people that get into it sort of more rationally by studying it and seeing what it's all about and so on, and not just like sort of swallowing propaganda from the Worldcoins of the world, they tend to come in and realize Bitcoin for what it is. This is what happened to Russell Okung. This is what happened to Michael Saylor. The people that get it really actually studied it beforehand. And those are the people, I think, that will, succeed. And as a result, we'll see a lot more of that behavior going forward. Right now, though, it is a fiat world where people want to gamble, where people want to rent seek. They don't want to work hard. They don't want to go and build things. They want to rent seek, and that's unfortunately the mentality of most people, or a significant number of people in the world. And until that mentality is just completely obliterated, we're going to see altcoins, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's the same in the countries I visited. So the first interest is always in Bitcoin and altcoins immediately. So if you talk about Bitcoin, they ask you about Cardano and things like that. I always try to make the differences clear. What makes Bitcoin so unique and why it's the only thing that no one can take away from you, and why it's a great tool also to save. Because I mean, I had one guy in Zambia, a young man, coming up to me and saying, I'm a Bitcoiner because you know what? I wanted to invest the money I earned, and it's not possible for me to buy Apple stocks or any kind of stocks that you can get easily in the US. And with Bitcoin, I found something that I can also use here. And that's the reason why I started to look into it. And I agree totally with what Jimmy said about when you have looked into Bitcoin, when you have studied it, you won't be an altcoiner anymore. Happened to me as well. And I mean, I never was an altcoiner, but at the beginning, when I came in early 2017, there was this huge altcoin bull run, and everyone was telling me you need to diversify. And now I'm the one who's going to the people who want to diversify, and I'm telling them, if you want to diversify, don't do it in the cryptocurrency space. Yeah, get some gold if you can, or buy a house, or build a house, or learn something. It's much better than investing in one of those kinds of schemes. And on the other hand, the first reaction when I'm in Zimbabwe or in Zambia and I'm talking about the work I do and that I'm a Bitcoin educator, people always ask me, but is it not a scam? So everyone has heard about Bitcoin, but 95 or let's say 98% of the people think it's a scam because everyone has been scammed in one or the other way, or one of his relatives or friends or whatever. Because there are not only the world coins of the world. Sadly, there are also enough people in these countries who start their own Ponzi schemes and scams, and they take the name of Bitcoin for it. And of course, it's not really Bitcoin. So what I see is it takes time. So when people show up to the meetup the first time or something, and you talk with them, they are always interested in other coins as well. And they ask me, so why should I only use Bitcoin? Yeah. And but you can't force people to it. They have to understand it themselves. They have to use it. And I always say, as soon as someone has used Bitcoin and has seen what it can do for them, they will never use anything else anymore. I mean, for small exchanges or whatever, you use another cryptocurrency or USDT. But to hold money long term, or to have an uncensorable tool that you can use, it's basically only Bitcoin, and it mostly takes time. But people, the more they look into it, the more Bitcoin only they get. And what I've also seen in Zambia, which I'm very happy to see, is that people are interested. For instance, they sent a message to me the other day because they saw that Gridless is now mining in Zambia. And they said to me, can we please go to the Gridless mining site? We want to see how this works. And another guy said to me when I said there's a conference at the end of January next year in Cape Town, a Bitcoin conference. And he said, we should get together a group of people going there. And so these are the same people who at the beginning told me that they do everything. And yeah, that's how it goes.
Yeah, it's a cycle. And I think when people like see Bitcoiners talk out against altcoins, they're like, "Oh, you guys are just being, tribalistic, and you're just talking out against another competing quote unquote cryptocurrency." But really, what it does is it keeps people away from a technology that can really help them, especially in these jurisdictions. And it kind of stains Bitcoin's reputation, even though it's not warranted, even though they're completely different technologies. It gets conflated, and there's a lot of confusion that happens because of these altcoins. So I think it's really important to differentiate between the two. And what bugs me about them personally is the decentralization theater. These DINOs. I think that was even coined by SEC Commissioner Hester Pierce, who said these are decentralized in name only. And you always that it always comes to light when something bad happens to these other cryptocurrencies, because that's when they kind of either roll back the chain, they ban users. When there's a hack or something bad, that's when you actually see that they're not decentralized. Bitcoin is different. And I was wondering, Jimmy, if I could just get your thoughts on the recent regulatory actions against these other cryptocurrencies besides Bitcoin. What are your thoughts around them? Some people are like against it because they're very like free market. We shouldn't have the regulators do anything. Other people are like, this is warranted because you're protecting investors. What are your thoughts around these regulatory actions?
Well, I think in many ways this was inevitable, right? You're saying that you're decentralized, but you have a centralized foundation. You did a pre-mine, and you sold to investors. Who did all of these things? It's so obvious that they are centralized, and just saying, "Hey, we're decentralized, we're decentralized, we're decentralized," does not keep the government off your back. So in a sense, they're getting what was the natural consequence of of the actions that they were taking. Now, a lot of altcoiners get mad at me and say when I say, "Well, I don't care about that." They're like, "Oh, they're going to come after you next." Well, I'd like to see them try, because we're decentralized. We're actually decentralized, and not like in name only decentralized. So, in a sense, it's like watching two people that you don't necessarily care for like fighting. It's like, okay, well, like whatever, doesn't really have that much to do with me. Unfortunately, like people ask your opinion as if like your Bitcoin maximalist support is going to get the SEC off your back or something. We know that Bitcoin is decentralized, that regulators may at some point try to regulate, and in many ways they have. but like, we're not vulnerable to this thing that all of these other coins are, right? Like you can go arrest Vitalik tomorrow and like demand certain things from him. Any government can do that if he's within their borders. You can't. What do you do with Bitcoin, right? Like, who do you arrest to stop the entire network? You can't do it. But you arrest Vitalik, and he decrees that the chain that you're running is not Ethereum. Then the chain that you're running is not Ethereum, right? It's this weird situation where a lot of altcoiners are demanding Bitcoiners support them, despite them having told us that we don't matter, that we're outdated, and insulting us all along the way, and then saying we're all in this together. No, we're not. We've never been in this together. We're there. In fact, the we here is the entire Bitcoin community. The we that you're referring to are the centralized controllers of these altcoins. You have nothing to do with us. And it's frustrating to me that so many altcoiners continue to spout this lie.
Anita, did you have any reaction?
I would like to say that I think one of the points I always use, or an argument to tell people the difference between an altcoin and Bitcoin, is that there's no company or no person behind it. So no one can really shut it down or hinder you from accessing it. And that's one thing that most people understand in Africa, because they all have problems with their bank accounts. They get shut out and things like that. And so they immediately understand that. And I say to them, well, Ethereum is basically like a company for me, or Cardano, or whatever, Worldcoin. They are all companies. They can all decide what happens next. And you won't get asked. And so that's something that people understand. And I think we should put the emphasis on the most basic, understandable differences, understandable for the regular people, for the people on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly seems like people are starting to wake up to this whole decentralized and name only. I mean, even in the SEC's complaint, even Cardano was one of them, and they just listed out like page after page of why this is more like an organization that's in control. And obviously, Bitcoin's different. But it seems like there's a sentiment shift happening, and there's one common thread between all of these lawsuits, and that Bitcoin can't be found in any of them. And you're also seeing like institutional interests really start to focus more on Bitcoin as the word starts to get out of, okay, this thing is actually in a league of its own. All these other things are kind of, unregistered securities, more centralized, and you can, invest your money if you want, but there's been a lot of false advertising there. There's been a lot of false marketing and a lot of people have lost money because of that. And so I think it's a good thing that these things are starting to come to light, and hopefully more and more people will understand the difference between Bitcoin, with educators like you guys kind of leading the way. I wanted to just, the last 5 minutes here, you guys both work on a lot of different projects. I wanted to give you guys a few minutes to just talk about your latest projects or pieces of work that you're working on. Jimmy, I know you said you had a book, so why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the book's title is Fiat Ruins Everything, and I wrote it basically during the year that I was traveling. And it goes into a lot of different aspects of life, really, of everything that we hold dear, and how all of them, every single one, has been corrupted by fiat money, and how it's, like I said at the beginning, kind of like the water that we're swimming in, and removing a lot of the fiat infection is the work of Bitcoin, and that's where we get a lot of the much better things to come. But analyzing what's happened with, for example, families, right? Like, why are people having so few babies all over the world?
Yeah.
Birth rates are down absolutely everywhere. Why is there a replication crisis in science? What's going on? What is this different? What's different now versus like a couple hundred years ago, when you had so many significant discoveries going on all the time? What's going on? I seek to answer a lot of those questions in a bunch of essays that are in the book. It's available on Amazon right now, which I found out yesterday, But I will be doing some sort of crowdfund in the next week or so for signed versions and prints and things like that. But that's the new thing that I have coming.
Awesome. Is that the 5th book that you've written
It
on
is
Bitcoin?
book number 5.
Number 5.
Fiat ruins everything. Yes.
Awesome. I can't wait to read that one. What about you, Anita? What are you working on that you're excited about?
Yeah, I'm excited about my new online learning program that I'm going to launch. I hope tomorrow or maybe early next week. I'm always like to make better. So no, it's basically a online course program. On the one hand, it's for newbies who want to get into understanding Bitcoin, and also with very practical work, so tips and parts where you learn how to install a wallet and to receive some Satoshis and things like that. And on the other hand, it's a scholarship program for aspiring Bitcoin educators and community leaders in the global South, who otherwise would not be able to afford this kind of education. And the goal is to share knowledge with those people who then can share it with their peers on the ground. Because when I go there and I do workshops or keynotes or things like that, that's great. And it's great to build trust. But it's very punctual. Bitcoin is a very fast-moving space. You have new developments with wallets and what's ever coming out. And so people need information on a regular basis. And that's why that program, for instance, is a year. And people get to know the differences between the wallets and why you might need to change. And that's the program I'm going to launch in the coming days. It's at cracktyorange.com. And I didn't want Bitcoin in the name because of possible censorship, or also like with payment methods, you sometimes really have problems when Bitcoin is in the name. And that's the big thing I'm working on. And another thing I want to say for people who want to start a podcast, especially also those people who can't afford like $10 a month for a podcast platform, for instance, and don't want to give away their content for free to Anchor and Spotify, there is btcpodcasting.com. It's a platform that I've built together with Albi. And you can immediately like host your podcast for free and receive Satoshis via value for value streaming into your wallet. That's the other platform I'm working on at the moment. So these two are the big things.
Very cool. I like educating Bitcoin educators. It's very meta. Mm-hmm. I love that. And so thank you. I can't thank you guys enough for coming on Swan Signal Live and for basically leading by example as Bitcoin educators. Jimmy teaching programming courses, writing books, speaking. Anita, all the work that you do in Africa, Crack the Orange. I can't wait to see that get off the ground. I know it's going to be great. So thank you for coming on the show. You guys both remind us of why Bitcoin is a tool for freedom. And so keep doing Satoshi's work, and I can't wait to continue to follow it. Everyone should go check him out on Twitter. Why don't you guys throw out your handles real quick, just so people who maybe aren't familiar with you guys know where to follow you?
Yeah, it's basically my name, Anita Posch in one word, and Posch is with SCH.
Great. Jimmy?
And it's Jimmy Song on, I guess, X now. It's no longer really Twitter.
Oh, yeah, it's X. Oh, yeah, forgot. Cool. Well, go follow them. Go follow these two. They're great follows. I learned a lot from them. And thanks for coming on the show, guys. I really appreciate the conversation. And this was another great episode of Swan Signal Live. Thanks for listening. Again, check out pacificbitcoin.com if you're interested in going to a wonderful conference October 5th and 6th in beautiful Santa Monica. Check out pacificbitcoin.com. You can get tickets 21% off by promo code SIGNAL today. And thank you for listening. And we'll have another great show next week. And want to give one more shout out to the Pub Key fellas in New York City. Go check out Pub Key. Go grab a beer. Go talk Bitcoin with Bitcoiners. It's a wonderful spot. So have a great day, everybody.